Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily. I'm Nicholas Richardson and this is the news. During its Friday session, the Sejm elected a new marshal, the head of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Administration, Elżbieta Witek. The previous marshal, Marek Kuchciński, resigned from this function yesterday following public revelations about his having used government aircraft on numerous occasions for personal rather than official purposes. Alexandra Zajiczka has more.
Elżbieta Witek nowym marszałkiem Sejmu zastąpiła Marka Kuchcińskiego.
Elżbieta Witek is the new Speaker of the Sejm. She replaced Marek Kuchciński, who today, in compliance with yesterday's declaration, resigned. There were three candidates. The Civic Platform submitted Małgorzata Kidawa-Błońska, and the Polish People's Party submitted Urszula Pasławska. The majority of votes, 245, were cast for the Law and Justice candidate. There were flowers and applause. At one point, Law and Justice Party MPs turned towards Marek Kuchciński to applaud him as well. Law and Justice Party deputies wanted to thank Marek Kuchciński for the function he had performed, and at the end, Elżbieta Witek took the floor and addressed the deputies. She said, "I don't feel better than you. I'm one of you. I was one of the 460 deputies elected in democratic elections." She called for support in the Sejm, and despite the differences that naturally occur between its members.
Na koniec Elżbieta Witek zabrała głos, no i w takim pojednawczym.
Only when the Civic Platform dismisses all those responsible for scandals, with the VAT scandal at the forefront, when they dismiss Stanisław Gawłowski, when they dismiss Sławomir Neumann with other charges, only then will you be able to start learning something about morality. Unfortunately, I think it is already too late.
Mam do Państwa olbrzymią prośbę, jeśli mogę o to prosić.
I have something to ask all of you, if I may. I think that these 14 years allow me to ask this of you. On this heated day, when some unnecessary words are being spoken, I think that sometimes it is better to stop talking than say one sentence too many, because then you regret it. These things are remembered, and this reluctance, this aggression fuels further aggression. This is unnecessary. Let's calm down, ladies and gentlemen, because we are all here for one purpose. The nation chose us to represent them and their interests.
A te zmiany w Sejmie wiążą się także ze zmianami w rządzie, bo Elżbieta
These changes in the Sejm are also associated with the changes in the government. Elżbieta Witek was the Minister of Internal Affairs and Administration from June this year, when she replaced Joachim Brudziński in this position, who took the office of MEP. It is unofficially said that the ministry recently managed by Elżbieta Witek will now be directed by Mariusz Kamiński. It is not known who will replace him as coordinator for the special services. This information will be known in the next few days.
Te informacje z całą pewnością poznamy w najbliższych dniach.
New rules concerning flights by government officials are to be introduced. At the end of August, a bill will be brought forward to regulate these issues, the Law and Justice Party leader Jarosław Kaczyński has announced. Today, the head of the Prime Minister's Chancellery, Michał Dworczyk, spoke about the details of the rules and gave an assurance that the heads of all parliamentary clubs will be invited to contribute to the drafting of the new law.
As a consequence of recent events, Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki has decided to prepare a new law. This is the Act on the Organization of Flights for the most important people in the country. We want to clarify the rules on which accompanying persons may use these planes, or rather, take part in these flights. We want to introduce a clear and precise ban on flights for families, apart from the ones that require their participation in official delegations. Prohibition of participation is not only for the families of the most important people in the country, but also for the parliamentarians who sometimes accompany VIPs. There will be a clear ban unless they are persons taking part in the official delegation, and the nature of the ceremonies or events in which one of the most important people in the state takes part will justify the participation of the families of the VIPs.
Following the Kukiz 15 movement's decision to form a coalition with the Liberal Polish People's Party for the upcoming parliamentary elections in Poland, more politicians are leaving the political group, which was formed by Paweł Kukiz in 2015. On Friday, 4 members resigned and announced the creation of a new club of members of parliament named the Union for Real Policy. With more on what will happen to the Kukiz 15 movement after its alliance with the left, here's Bartosz Tidorowicz.
Both political leaders announced a joint start in the autumn parliamentary elections at the press conference yesterday. Based on the agreement between the two sides, MPs of the Kukiz 15 movement will be on the Polish People's Party's electoral lists, and the Liberal Party will include some of the Kukiz 15 movement's postulates in their program. The alliance was a bit unexpected, as not so long ago Paweł Kukiz criticized the Liberals' leader. Today, however, he expressed his complete trust in Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz. If I didn't have complete trust in Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz and didn't get to know him as a man who truly wants to change Poland and make it more democratic, then I would never sign this agreement with him. Paweł Kukiz reportedly led talks with all the political parties, including the Law and Justice Party, but as Grzegorz Długi revealed, due to a lack of will to compromise from the current ruling party, he had no choice but to form an alliance with the left.
Paweł Kukiz rozmawiał z panem prezesem.
Paweł Kukiz talked with Mr. Kaczyński, but they couldn't reach an understanding on even the most basic matters. The Law and Justice Party first made it impossible for us to compromise and then tried to take us apart, so there we are. We keep fighting and we'll see how it goes.
Aby nie ułatwić życia.
The announcement of the Kukiz 15 movement joining the Polish coalition has disappointed many sympathizers of Paweł Kukiz on social media. According to columnist Krzysztof Karnkowski, this decision could mean bad news for the coalition's election result.
Paweł Kukiz miał taki dobry moment.
Paweł Kukiz had a better moment to enter the coalition, which was right after the European Parliament elections. It was then when he could have joined forces with the Polish People's Party as an equal, with similar support. Now his party is weakened, he's losing MPs and voters left and right, so he's really joining the coalition as a smaller ally. It's a huge loss for his movement. The joint start of the Kukiz 15 movement and the Polish People's Party in the parliamentary elections in autumn proves once again that nothing is impossible in the Polish political scene, especially when a party's existence is threatened. The reliability of the former enemies will be verified in October.
The United States ambassador to Germany, Richard Grenell, warned Berlin that his country could withdraw some soldiers from the Rhine and redeploy them to Poland. This is in response to Germany's defence spending, which, in Washington's assessment, has in recent years been too low, well below the NATO target of 2% of GDP. Grenell thereby repeated an earlier suggestion of the American ambassador to Poland, Georgette Mosbacher, that troops could be moved.
It is really offensive to assume that the US taxpayer must continue to pay to have 50,000 plus Americans, soldiers and civilian crew in Germany, while the Germans get to spend their surplus on domestic programs. Currently, of the 29 NATO countries, only 5 meet the required criteria and spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense. As well as the USA, these include Great Britain, Estonia, Greece and Poland. President Trump has repeatedly criticized his allies from NATO, particularly Germany, for allocating too little funds for defense and failing to fulfill their obligations. Meanwhile, the US ambassador to Poland, Georgette Mosbacher, praises Poland and isn't ruling out relocating American soldiers there.
Poland meets its 2% of GDP spending obligations towards NATO. Germany does not. We would welcome American troops in Germany to come to Poland.
That's the news. Thank you for watching. Stay with us for the weather, Poland Daily Business and more programmes. But from me, it's have a good night and a better tomorrow.
Welcome to Poland Daily Weather. Let's take a look at the forecast for tonight. A warm night across the country with temperatures ranging between 14 to 18 degrees on the southwest. Rainfalls are expected around Bydgoszcz, Poznań and Łódź. Little showers is expected over Koszalin as well. And now over to tomorrow. Light overcast on western Poland but otherwise with sunlight, while on the east we are expecting downpour and gusty wind. The temperature will range from 21 degrees to 27 degrees in Szczecin. Let's see the forecast for the following 3 days. Wednesday will be a sunny day all over Poland with maximum 29 degrees. On Thursday, temperature will rise to 30 degrees on the west. Loads of sun in the whole country. And on Friday, weather will be very similar with little higher temperatures ranging from 26 to 31 degrees. Thank you for watching and goodbye.
Poland Daily Business Edition. Tonight our guest is Piotr Palutkiewicz of Union of Entrepreneurs and Employers. Sir, welcome to the show.
Hello.
And looking at the Polish economy, 2 years ago, everyone expected that we will have inflation finally, and that inflation will be between 1.5% and 2% year to year. Right now we have 2.9%.
2.9, that's correct. It's almost 3%, and it's above the expectations of experts, of economists.
Right.
The target of Polish National Bank for years it was 2.5. So it's the first quarter when we can see the inflation above that central bank target. So it's an interesting fact on the one side, but the other, it may lead to the problems in the economy. The inflation above the target, above the expectation, is always a problem for the economy.
Are we able to estimate now why the inflation is higher than expected?
Yeah, the draw that we had experienced this autumn, this spring, it's the main factor. The prices of food, the prices of fruits and vegetables, is the inflation of those in this basket is around 6%. So this is the factor that led our inflation, the global inflation, to that point of 3%.
This is in a way good for the farmers because they will sell their products on a higher price.
It's not really good for them because it's rather a supply shock. It means that we've got the less products that we expected, so we have to sell those products at the higher prices. However, the margin and the global income that they will have will remain on the same level that what we may expect.
Okay. Another idea is that this is somehow connected to the slump in the German economy. This German industrial machine is significantly slowing down, which translates to the lower orders in our manufacturing base.
It may work. It may work on a different from the different perspective. Actually, in the European Union, we've got the inflation around 1.2–1.3%, and it's below expectations. So we can compare that. In Poland, we've got the higher inflation that we expected, and comparing to European Union, where that inflation is below the expectations. And the other point of view is that we've got the economic turn down, we've got the slowdown in the economy, so the inflation should be lower. However, the Polish economy, the Polish GDP year to year is below expectation, is above expectations. So we've got the above of expectations when it comes to the inflation. So those two areas should put that inflation somewhere to the middle. However, the last quarter, the last month shows that so far this hasn't happened.
I would subscribe to this explanation connected to the drought and agricultural sector, because that's one and only visible sector. When we have problems, lack of water, the government is going to take care about that. They already announced a program of building some containers that will stop the rainwater that we have. Poland is right now storing about 5% of the water. Mm-hmm. The investment that has been declared will allow us to stop 15% of the water. Again, 85% of the rainwater is flowing to the Baltic Sea without of any industrial or economical use. But we should end this conversation with information about the real state of Polish economy, and it never has been so good as far as I remember.
Yeah, that's a good news. So we've got one of the highest GDP growth in the world. We are in the top 5 of the countries with the highest growth, so that's good. But that next year, 2020, will be the most difficult, and after the elections, we hope that level of growth will remain at the same high level.
Right. Is that incidental because everyone else is growing, all boats are rising on the tide, or this is due to some policy of Polish government?
Last years in global economy were very good. So we flew on that wave. We flew on that good economy environment, and we've got a good fundings. You know, the basics, the good base of our economy. So it's a merge of those two factors: the global environment and the good Polish base of the economy, and the governmental spendings that may be or maybe not the problem that may occur the next years, because the governmental expenditures will be too high, and I hope that will not happen and will not affect the economy in the wrong way.
We will see. Thank you very much. Piotr Palutkiewicz of the Union of Entrepreneurs and Employers was our guest tonight, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And that was it for tonight's Poland Daily Business.
Welcome back to Poland Daily Weather. Let's take a look at the forecast for tomorrow. Light overcast on western Poland, but otherwise with sunlight, while on the east we are expecting downpour and gusty wind. The temperatures will range from 21 degrees to 27 in Szczecin. And now let's see tomorrow's forecast for our continent. Alternating rain and sun will dominate in Central Europe, and there we will see about 22 and 26 degrees. In British Islands, temperature will range from 22 to 31 degrees. The highest will be in Madrid, 36 degrees. Thank you for watching and goodbye.
Dobry wieczór Państwu, Emilia Pobłocka, witam bardzo serdecznie.
Good evening, my name is Emilia Pobłocka. I'd like to warmly welcome you. Our meeting place is very special, especially for my guest. She is the world-famous opera singer, mezzo-soprano and director of the Warsaw Chamber Opera, Mrs. Alicja Węgorzewska. Is the stereotypical egocentrism of artists also a problem?
Wie pani co, to jest też okrutny rynek, bo jest ogromny strach.
You know, my field features a cruel market. There's a huge general fear in people that if I decide to give birth to a child or two, I will be out of the scene for 2 years. And then would I go back to?
Tutaj wypadnę prawie 2 lata, a potem nie będzie do czego.
Sometimes this is not just egocentrism, but reality, although it probably does play a role. But most of the fear that plagues people is the fact that they've sacrificed a huge chunk of their life for the arts, and maybe nothing will remain to show for it.
Ogromny kawał swojego życia dla sztuki.
But it's also crucial to hold back one's ego. It must be remembered that if one decides to go into this profession, then they must be ready to accept that nothing may be eternal and nothing is given forever.
Że to nic nie jest wieczne i nic nie jest dane na zawsze.
Does your daughter show artistic talent? And if so, would you recommend her to go your way, or would you advise her to choose something easier?
Każdy musi przeżyć swoje życie sam.
You know what? How should I express this? Everyone must live their lives. No parent has the right to impose on the child what to do in their lives.
Zawodów się nie dziedziczy, ani miejsca w życiu się nie dziedziczy. Każdy musi...
He should not inherit any professions, nor does he inherit his place in life. Everyone must find their own place, create, co-work for them.
Ci wspaniałych rodziców, którzy radzą sobie z wielkim nazwiskiem.
Sometimes there are the children of wonderful parents who were dealt a great father or mother's name, and they keep these family traditions very well. but there are also children who walk a different path.
Chodzi do szkoły muzycznej. Natomiast powiem, że
my daughter goes to music school. However, I will say that dancing, musical and improvisation attract her more than the opera. Her musical interests are strongly musical. However, they are completely in areas other than mine.
Są silnie muzyczne, natomiast zupełnie w innych obszarach się znajdują.
So, in the end, you do not know how things will turn out.
Ma całe życie.
It is not known. He is only 15 years old and he will be a doctor.
Fantasio, lei possedere dovrà, vedrò per amore, unita un fine oggetto, me destò un affetto, che per me poi non ha, che per me poi non ha. Vedrò mentre io sospiro, c'è un servo mio, vedrò che un ben ch'io desio ei posseder dovrà. Vedrò per manca amore, unita un vile oggetto, che me destò un affetto, che per me poi non ha, che per me poi non ha. Vedrò, a non lasciarti in pace, non può questo contento. Tu non nascesti autate, tu non nascesti autate per dare a me tormento e forse ancor per ridere la infelicità. C'ha la speranza sola che le vendette mie quest'anima consola e
Great artists like you often avoid commercial projects because they are afraid of pigeonholing. They are afraid of the assessment of others. However, she appeared as a juror in the Battle for Voices program. You also talked about the performance with Michał Wiśniewski. You were also a juror in the Eurovision Song Contest. Do you somehow connect this art with commercialism to bring people closer to the opera?
Żeby przybliżyć ludziom operę?
Muzyka jest jak język. Trzeba się nauczyć tego języka.
Music is like language. You need to learn this language so that you can navigate in the world of music. Otherwise, people will flee, for they do not understand what one is trying to convey.
I używanie na przykład słowa muzyka poważna, to wręcz budzi mój sprzeciw.
The use of, for example, the word classical music actually raises my opposition, because many regard it as the only serious music.
Dowcipnymi kompozytorami. Jeśli pomyślimy o
Rossini or Mozart were really amazing witty composers, but if we think about cultural education, even on the stage of the Battle of the Voices, somewhere I managed to sneak a piece of classics along the Christmas episodes, and this also helped promulgate the art form. And besides, if thanks to that some people start attending the opera, that's more for the better.
A poza tym, jeśli dzięki temu ktoś potem wybrał się do opery.
Dowiedział się.
I will say that Michał Wiśniewski, also thanks to me, went to the Grand Theatre for the Peak Ladies. He came beautifully dressed in a tuxedo and gave autographs in the hall of the Grand Theatre.
A rozdawał autografy na korytarzu teatru.
Amici dai
Thank you very much for the interview. Thank you for bringing us into the world of opera, which is a beautiful and a magical place. But to experience it, you have to come and see it for yourself. Our guest was Alicja Węgorzewska, the director of the Warsaw Chamber of Opera. Thank you so very much for joining us, and see you again.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Poland Daily History. Today we are visiting the Pawiak Prison Museum in Warsaw. This prison is one of the most famous places for Polish martyrdom during the Second World War, where 100,000 prisoners passed through these gates during the war, of which 47,000 were murdered. This prison is one of the most well-known sites of Polish martyrdom during the Second World War, with around 100,000 prisoners passing through its gates during the war, and 37,000 of them were murdered. Join us as we explore the history of one of the most brutal aspects of the German occupation. So during 1939, when the Germans invaded Poland and occupied Warsaw, as I know, they very rapidly took advantage of the Pawiak prison here. And I was wondering what the drastic changes they made and how did they utilize this prison.
Pawiak rzeczywiście został bardzo szybko przejęty przez Niemców, bowiem już 2 października 1939 roku
It was actually taken over very quickly by the Germans, as on October 2nd, 1939, the Germans organized a prison here under the control and management of the Gestapo. Initially, Pawiak was only used partially as the main building suffered much damage during the battles over Warsaw. This was also the explanation for all the prisoners. The first prisoners during the German occupation were primarily hostages, clergy, teachers, representatives of the intelligentsia. They were all usually sent to the former female prison building called Serbia. At Pawiak, during the beginning of the week, there was a lack of electricity, light, there was no water, there was famine and extreme overpopulation. The women's prison was intended for around 200 prisoners, yet very quickly its population reached 700. The year 1939 is still when the service at Pawiak was performed by officers from the pre-war period, the Polish prison guards. This was when prisoners were still being treated in a humanitarian manner in accordance with pre-war norms. The prisoners would still benefit from some privileges. They could still use the prison chapel, the library, they could go on a walk in the prison yard, receive correspondence and packages containing food, clothing. The situation, however, was constantly getting worse. More and more detainees would appear at Pawiak, the first victims of the so-called Intelligence Action, which was an operation based on arresting representatives of intellectual elites, political elites, practiced from the beginning of the German occupation and immediately after it as a kind of continuation, a so-called AB action, an abbreviation from the German language derived from a special pacification action when the Germans established arrests in occupied territories of at least 20,000 Poles. The majority of them were transported to this prison, to Pawiak. Not only did they occupy the Serbia building, but also the former school building and the kennel of the prison guard, the building that was located in the corner of the prison yard. The culminating point of the AB action, going on from the end of 1940, were the executions. Probably the most well-known, most massive ones take place in Palmyra, where at the end of June 1940, several hundred Pawiak prisoners were killed. Some people killed during the AB action were actually shot for no reason. This happened just because they were representatives of the political elite, intellectual elite, social activists, economic and military activists. About 3,000 detainees were charged with criminal charges, although one can only guess that these accusations were in fact false. The Germans arrested people who violated orders of the occupation authorities, the orders which were very restrictive, immensely ridiculous orders.
Na terenie Polski bardzo restrykcyjne, zarządzenia wręcz niedorzeczne.
As long as the prison wardens in the Pawiak prison were mainly consisting of Polish nationals, the Polish underground movement could count on help from many of them to pass information between the inmates and the resistance. The Germans eventually realized that Polish wardens could not be trusted, and as a result of the German countermeasures, life in the Pawiak prison became even more unbearable than it previously had been. So at the start of the occupation, the prisoners here were still guarded by the pre-war Polish wardens. And I was wondering at what point did it change and what drastic changes that the switching of the wardens had made.
Rzeczywiście do listopada 1940 roku służbę na Pawiaku pełnili przedwojenni funkcjonariusze Polskiej Straży Więziennej. Jednak Niemcy bardzo szybko zorientowali się, że strażnicy polscy są skłonni pomagać osadzonym.
Indeed, until November 1940, the pre-war functionaries of the Polish prison guards served at Pawiak. However, the Germans soon realized that the Polish guards were willing to help the prisoners. They realized that they were transferring secret messages, that is, small letters secretly written in prison, that they were smuggling extra food into the prison. Therefore, in November 1940, at the time when the district surrounding the Pawiak surrounded by a wall, when the ghetto was created around Pawiak, the Germans introduced several Gestapo officers here, and from November 1940, more than 40 Gestapo officers were employed in the Pawiak service. The situation changed further over time. Polish guards were suspected of assisting political prisoners, in other words, people suspected by the Germans for various types of resistance, for activities within the Polish underground state. In the best case, these guards were transferred to other penitentiary institutions where most prisoners were detained. In the worst case scenario, these Polish guards, which were called helping the prisoners, became prisoners themselves and were included in subsequent transports going to German concentration camps or were shot together with the Pawiak prisoners. In their place, the Germans introduced further Gestapo officers, subsequent SS men. In March of 1942, after mass arrests under the guise of replacing the Polish prison guards, more than 20 Polish officers were detained, and the Germans introduced about 50 Ukrainian SS men from a training camp in Trawniki, not too far from Lublin. The behavior of both the German and Ukrainian SS men in relation to the prisoners was completely different than the pre-war prison guards. The terror increased. In the following months, years, the Germans liquidated these small privileges which at the beginning of the occupation were granted to the detainees, for example, the prison chapel where one could pray. It was replaced, and in its place was a detention for prisoners sentenced to death. The books from the old library became fuel for the boiler room. The parcels passed from relatives severely dropped in their quantities. Also, correspondence had to be written in German from now on and was subject to very strict censorship. The German Guards and a large part of the Ukrainians serving in the German service treated members of the underground movements as dangerous criminals, as well as bandits who committed the greatest crimes. It was common that prisoners would be sent to the so-called Karzer, where they would sit in the dark, practically without any food, starving. It also happened that the Germans, for the most trivial offences, would subject the prisoners to what they referred to as gymnastics. The prisoners were ordered to perform, in either narrow prison corridors or in prison yard, something that could be compared to forced gymnastics combined with the elements of a drill. These people were forced to perform squats, jump in the cobbled courtyard, they had to crawl on the stones, they had to run around in the courtyard and fall down on command. The atrocities performed by the Germans are almost impossible to imagine today. Imagine a situation in which prisoners subject to these kinds of gymnastic exercises were ordered to crawl onto a pile of slag that would lay next to the boiler room in the prison yard. Slag which was constantly removed from under the extremely hot ovens, almost red from heat. These prisoners had to carry out such orders, which of course left them with serious burns. If they refused, they were beaten and kicked. It so happened that the German guards, whilst accepting the prisoners to the Pawiak, would send the new detainees to the baths. They would then pour boiling hot water on them, then iced water. It was common for Germans to steal the detainees' property or money from the deposit. It was also common for them to murder prisoners under the guise of thwarting their attempts to escape the prison.
W depozycie na porządku dziennym było mordowanie więźniów pod pozorem udaremnienia prób ucieczki.
As we have seen today, the Pawiak prison is a place of special importance in Polish history. During the 4 years it was operated by the Germans, the level of brutality created an urge for revenge, which finally erupted on August 1st, 1944, the first day of the Warsaw Uprising. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. I'll see you next time on Poland Daily History.
The Warsaw Uprising began on the 1st of August, 1944. 0 hour, or W hour as they called it, was supposed to be at 5 o'clock. But the first outbreak of shooting began earlier in the day at Żoliborz, the northern suburb of Warsaw. That encounter, which began at 1:30 p.m., was the first skirmish of the Warsaw Uprising. As the saying goes, much has been written. Was it a good idea? Was it launched at the right time? Were there other opportunities? You may well ask. The fact remains that it did take place, and the people who took part in it were brave and beautiful. In the annals of uprisings against tyrannical rule, the Warsaw Uprising is unsurpassed. For 63 days, the Poles waited for the Russians to come across the river from the east and aid them in their rebellion against the Nazis. This did not happen. History has told us why. The Russians were quite happy to watch the Poles be destroyed by the Germans, rather than for the Poles to be free after World War II. There is no doubt about this. This was Stalin's plan. The Warsaw Uprising is indelible on the memory of the 20th century. At the Warsaw Uprising Museum, this history is set in stark terms. You're able to take a close look at those 63 days of fighting for freedom. This is an experience that will not leave you untouched. It will change the way you think about history of this time. And it will remind you of what a great capital Warsaw actually is. The city that stood against one of the greatest tyrannies the world has ever seen and rose again to become a modern leading city in Europe. The next series of episodes will take you through the history of the Warsaw Uprising. Thanks for watching. Hello everybody and welcome back to Poland Daily Travel. We're in a very special place upstairs in the museum, this special room which I guess has a special light to preserve the quality of these. Yeah. What are these? It says protocol.
Yeah, these are protocols of exhumation. So when someone is buried, sometimes we take out the body to check whether that's the person we think is lying over there. So after the end of World War II, Polish Red Cross had plenty of work to do because Warsaw was one big cemetery. Yes, about 200,000 people who were buried or unburied lying here within the walls.
It was a graveyard, effectively, the city.
Exactly, that's it. Yeah. And well, in fact, in this place, we discovered the story of the Wola massacre. So those 3 days during the Warsaw Rising when German troops executed 50,000 civilians who lived here in this area. They eventually took 2 streets and they marched from the western parts of Warsaw towards the city center to clear their way to the Vistula River. That was the order of Hitler. And they killed anyone they met, 800 meters right, 800 meters left. So the heaps of corpses would reach the 2nd floor, yes. And after the war, we found 12 tons of human ashes here.
So the Wola is an area of Warsaw, we need to say that. It's rather a big area, and it's to the west of the city center. Is it the biggest part? Maybe it's the biggest
One of the biggest districts of Warsaw.
It's a large district at any rate. And you would pass through it on the road to Poznan, for example, or Campinos, perhaps, to the forest. So this was the area the Germans first attacked, wasn't it?
Yeah.
To try and take it back.
Yeah. And as we said, they used SS units, yes.
They used the SS, right?
They respected no Geneva Convention. That's why they would kill anyone they met on their way, women, children, men.
They just killed everybody, but then they stopped at a certain point. What was the reason?
Because they did not have enough ammunition. Yes, they would report to their bosses in military forces. What shall we do? We have too many detained people and not enough ammunition.
They don't have enough bullets to kill all the people. Quite simply.
Yeah, but they would tackle the problem very well because they would use simply butts to kill whoever they met.
The rifle butt, just to on the skull. So this is an example of a fairly sinister, not fairly, an unfairly sinister business. In fact, one of the most sinister undertakings one can imagine.
And when you hold these protocols in your hands, you feel that they are heavy. Each weighs 8.8 pounds. And do you know why?
No.
That's the weight of human ashes. That's what's left of us once we are burned.
So the human ashes weigh this much, and that's the symbolic nature of this. So each of these has a symbolic weight of the ashes of the person with their name and the date of birth, etc., etc. How did they identify the people just from...
Well, this was very difficult because we did not have DNA tests at that time. Yeah. So when you analyze these protocols that were conducted by Polish Red Cross, there are some special features of people who were found here. Yeah? So, for example, that they had their head broken or some parts of the garments that were found. But unthinkable tragedy. Perhaps one of the most tragic stories related to the Wola massacre is what happened to Wanda Luria. She had 3 kids. She got deported from her house. Kids got killed in front of her eyes. She was also, there was an attempt to kill her, but a bullet went through the back of her head. She was not killed. She fell on the heap of corpses.
Unconscious
onto her kids. She woke up after some time because she was not killed. She lied for 2 days on this heap of corpses, but on the 3rd day she decided to leave, to escape. Why? because she felt movements of her baby. She was 9 months pregnant. Her baby restarted to move, so she thought, well, I need to save my baby, the only that has chance to survive World War II. And eventually she managed to escape. 2 weeks later, she gave birth to her baby son, who lived till June 2018. From time to time, he would come here to our museum because he wanted to keep in memory all what happened to his closed ones, and he was very full of life, an energetic man, I'd say, and it's really striking because when you look at insurgents, those who are still with us, yes, because we have hundreds of them still alive.
Right. Because a lot of them were very young, as we said before. Yeah.
They have this sparkle in their eyes, and we ask ourselves, how is it possible after so many tough experiences?
Yeah. How is it possible? What can we learn from this? Do we know why it's possible? What do they say?
Well,
what can we learn from them?
They know what's the price of life.
They know that every day that you're above ground is quite something, and we're really rather lazy by comparison. I think that's an amazing story, really an amazing story, and worth remembering. I think another thing worth remembering is that even in the last days of the Jewish ghetto, I'm sure it was the same in the Warsaw Uprising, they were having parties and dancing right up until the last few days. So we need to pull our socks up these days. I think we have it a little too soft, and we don't realize how good our life.
We take everything for granted, and we never know.
And we should not. It's a big, big mistake. Yeah, and if anything, standing in this room, we can remember how much we owe to good fortune today compared to these people. Yeah. Okay, Ola, thanks. Stay with us, Poland Daily Travel. We've just been talking about the Wola massacre and lessons learned. Yeah, in travel you can learn a lot of lessons too. Stay with us, we're going to move on through. Poland Daily Travel at the Warsaw Uprising Museum.